My name is Kendall, and at 28 years old, I thought I knew my family pretty well. I graduated with an engineering degree from the University of Michigan, the son of a finance executive father and real estate mogul mother. Growing up in an upper-middle-class family, I always knew my older brother Anthony was the favorite, but I never imagined how far my parents would go to prove it. What I discovered during a routine visit to our family lawyer changed everything I thought I knew about family loyalty. Before I tell you how I discovered my parents' betrayal, drop a comment letting me know where you are watching from, and hit that subscribe button if you want more stories about family justice. I grew up in Highland Park, an affluent suburb north of Chicago, where success was measured by the square footage of your house and the brand of car parked in your driveway. My father, Richard, was the chief financial officer at a rapidly growing investment firm, while my mother, Diana, ran her own high-end real estate agency catering to the wealthy families in the area. From the outside, we were the picture-perfect American family, with our colonial-style house-manicured lawn and luxury vehicles. But inside those walls was a different story. From as early as I can remember, my older brother Anthony was the golden child. 4 years, my senior Anthony was athletic, charismatic, and most importantly to my father, interested in finance. While I preferred building computers and solving engineering problems, Anthony shadowed my father and soaked up everything about investments, markets, and networking with the right people. When I was 8 and Anthony was 12, our grandfather passed away and left a substantial inheritance. My parents announced they were establishing trust funds for both of us with equal amounts. The money would grow over time and would eventually help us through college and potentially provide a down payment on our first homes. I remember the formal meeting in our living room where they explained this to us. My father sat us down and said, "Boys, your education and future are the most important investments we could ever make. These trust funds will ensure you both have the best start in life. The money will be there when you need it for college, and you won't have to worry about student loans like many of your friends will." Throughout my teenage years, whenever conversations about college expenses came up, my parents would remind me that I was fortunate to have my trust fund waiting for me. "Your education is secured, Kendall," my mother would say. "Focus on your grades and getting into a good school. The financial side is already taken care of." I threw myself into my studies, hoping my academic achievements would earn me the approval that Anthony got so effortlessly. I graduated high school as valedictorian with perfect SAT scores, while Anthony had been a solid B student who excelled more in social situations than academics. Despite my accomplishments, my parents' reaction was muted compared to how they celebrated Anthony's average performance. When it came time for college, I chose the University of Michigan for their exceptional engineering program. My father made his disappointment clear that I hadn't chosen to follow in his footsteps by studying finance, preferably at his alma mater, Northwestern. "Engineering?" he questioned, with a hint of disdain. "There are solid career options there, I suppose. But you'll never have the connections or earning potential you would in finance." My mother was slightly more supportive, but still added, "Well, at least your education is covered by your trust fund. That gives you the freedom to explore this interest." Despite their lukewarm support, I thrived at Michigan. I maintained a 4.0 GPA, secured coveted internships with tech companies during summers, and built a network of like-minded friends who valued innovation and problem solving. While home for holidays, I would listen to my parents gush about Anthony's progress at his investment banking job, which he had secured largely through my father's connections. After graduating with honors with my engineering degree, I landed a job at a growing tech company in Chicago. My starting salary was respectable, though not at the level of what Anthony had been making in his first years in finance. Still, I was proud of earning my position entirely on my own merits, without family connections paving the way. It was about 6 months into my new job when I received an official-looking letter from Preston Harrington, our family lawyer. The letter was brief and somewhat cryptic, simply requesting my presence at his office to discuss matters pertaining to your financial interests. I assumed it was related to my trust fund. Perhaps some paperwork needed now that I was working full-time and establishing my adult financial life. I called the office and scheduled an appointment for the following week, thinking nothing of it. My parents had always handled the legal and financial details of our lives, and I trusted that everything was in order. After all, my father was a financial professional who managed millions for other people. Surely, he would have managed his own son's trust with the utmost care and responsibility. Little did I know that this routine meeting would reveal a betrayal so profound that it would forever alter my relationship with my family and change the course of my life. The trust that had been promised to secure my future had been hiding a secret that would soon come to light in that lawyer's office. I arrived at Harrington & Associates on a crisp Tuesday morning, dressed in business casual attire straight from the engineering department at my tech company. The firm occupied the 15th floor of a sleek downtown Chicago office building with views of Lake Michigan. The reception area featured dark wood paneling, leather chairs, and framed diplomas that signaled success and discretion. "Mr. Kendall Johnson," I said to the receptionist, "I have an appointment with Preston Harrington at 10:30. She smiled professionally. "Of course, Mr. Johnson. Mr. Harrington is expecting you. Please have a seat, and he will be with you shortly." I sat flipping through a finance magazine, expecting this to be a quick meeting about transferring control of my trust fund now that I was established in my career. Perhaps there would be some tax forms to sign or investment decisions to make. Nothing that would take more than 30 minutes out of my day. When Preston Harrington emerged from his office to greet me, I immediately sensed something was off. His handshake was not as firm as usual, and he avoided direct eye contact as he ushered me into his office. "Kendall, thank you for coming in today," he said, closing the door behind us. "Can I offer you some coffee or water?" "I am fine. Thank you," I replied, growing increasingly curious about his unusual demeanor. "Is everything okay, Preston? Your letter was rather vague." Preston settled into his large leather chair and cleared his throat. "Kendall, I asked you here today because there has been a development regarding your trust fund that I felt obligated to discuss with you in person." A slight uneasiness crept up my spine. "What kind of development?" Preston opened a folder on his desk and adjusted his glasses. 3 years ago, your parents made some significant changes to the trust arrangement that was established for you and your brother. "Changes?" I leaned forward. "What kind of changes?" "The assets that were originally designated for your trust were legally transferred to your brother's expanded trust," he said, his voice clinical and detached. "The documentation was all properly executed and in accordance with the terms that allowed your parents to maintain control of the trust until you reached the age of 30. My mind struggled to process what he was saying. "Are you telling me my trust fund no longer exists?" Preston nodded uncomfortably. "Essentially, yes. The funds that were earmarked for your education and future have been legally consolidated with Anthony's trust." The room seemed to tilt slightly. "So, Anthony now has both our shares." "Correct. The combined assets were placed under his name, with immediate access granted when he turned 26, which occurred last year." I sat in stunned silence for several moments, trying to understand the magnitude of this betrayal. My parents had spent my entire life assuring me that my education and initial adult expenses were secured. They had used this promise to influence my decisions, to placate me when I questioned why Anthony received more attention and resources. "Was this legal?" I finally asked, my voice sounding distant to my own ears. Preston shifted in his seat. "Yes. The original trust document gave your parents full discretionary control until you reached 30. They had the legal right to modify the terms, including transferring assets between the sibling trusts if they deemed it appropriate. "And why would they deem that appropriate?" I asked, working to keep my voice steady. "I am not privy to their specific reasoning," Preston replied, diplomatically. "Family financial planning can be complex, with many considerations that aren't apparent to outside observers." "I am hardly an outside observer, Preston. This was my trust fund." I took a deep breath. How much are we talking about here? What was the value of what was transferred? Preston consulted his papers. "At the time of transfer, your portion was valued at approximately $475,000. With market performance since then, it would likely be worth over $550,000 today." The number hit me like a physical blow. $500,000 that had been promised to me since childhood gone. Given to my brother, who already had his own equal share. Meanwhile, I still had student fees for my final semester waiting to be paid, believing all along they would be covered by this trust. Did my parents instruct you to inform me about this now? Why am I just learning about this 3 years after it happened? Preston looked genuinely uncomfortable. No, they did not request this meeting. I took it upon myself to inform you. While I represent your family as a whole, I felt you deserved to know the current state of affairs, especially as you've started your professional career. I nodded slowly, suspecting there was more to the story, but appreciating that he had at least brought this to my attention. I appreciate your honesty, Preston. I maintained my composure through the remainder of the meeting, asking technical questions about what assets had been included in my now non-existent trust and requesting copies of the transfer documentation. Preston provided what he could, though he reminded me several times that he ultimately worked for my parents. As we concluded the meeting, Preston stood and offered his hand again. "Kendall, I hope you understand that I was simply executing the legal wishes of your parents, as was my professional obligation." "I understand completely," I said, shaking his hand firmly, my mind already racing with implications and potential next steps. "This isn't about you, Preston. Thank you for bringing this to my attention." As I walked to my car in the parking garage, the full weight of the betrayal descended upon me. My parents had secretly redirected my future to further benefit my already favored brother. Years of feeling second best suddenly had concrete numerical validation. $500,000 worth of validation. I sat in my car for nearly an hour, processing what had happened and considering my options. My initial instinct was to call my parents immediately and demand answers, but something held me back. A lifetime of being the level-headed, rational son had taught me that emotional reactions rarely yielded optimal outcomes. Instead, I started my car and drove back to my apartment, determined to understand the full picture before taking any action. This betrayal required a response, but it would be calculated and measured rather than driven by the hurt and anger churning inside me. Over the next several days, I took a methodical approach to understanding exactly what had happened with my trust fund. I requested time off from work, telling my manager I had a family financial situation to handle. In reality, I was embarking on a full-scale investigation into my parents' betrayal. My first step was to dig through all the financial documents I had acquired over the years. Though I had always trusted my parents to handle the trust fund, I had received occasional statements and updates. Buried in a file box in my closet, I found statements from as far back as 5 years ago, showing the trust value and investment allocations. The most recent statement I had was from 4 years ago, just before the transfer occurred. It showed a healthy balance and a portfolio heavily weighted toward technology stocks and my father's company shares. The statement included online access information that I had never used, assuming I would get full control at 30, as Preston had mentioned. I tried the login information, not expecting it to still work after all this time. To my surprise, the credentials were still valid. The account showed zero balance with a note indicating account transferred the 15th of March 2022. However, I could still access the transaction history and portfolio structure from before the transfer. The most significant holdings had been 5,000 shares of my father's company, North Star Financial Group, which had been performing exceptionally well in recent years. Those shares alone would be worth over $300,000 at current market prices. What was most interesting, though, was that I could see pending transactions that had never been completed due to the account transfer. One of these was a scheduled tuition payment to the University of Michigan for my final semester, which was due in just under a month. My father had apparently set up the payment to process automatically from the trust, but never updated this arrangement after transferring the assets away. The university would be expecting this payment, and when it failed to arrive, they would contact me as the student responsible. This discovery gave me crucial information my parents had not informed the university about the change in funding. They had maintained the illusion that my education was still being covered by the trust even after secretly giving the money to Anthony. Perhaps they planned to pay the tuition from their personal funds when the time came, but they clearly hadn't wanted me to know about the trust transfer. My next step was to consult with a financial advisor of my own, someone with no connection to my family. I found Thomas Wright, a certified financial planner who specialized in inheritance and trust issues, and scheduled an urgent consultation. "This is an unusual situation," Thomas said after I explained everything. "While what your parents did was technically legal since they maintained control of the trust until you turned 30, there could be some gray areas worth exploring." "What kind of gray areas?" I asked. "Well, for one, if they made representations to you that the trust would cover specific expenses like your tuition, and you made educational decisions based on those representations, there could be a case for promissory estoppel. Basically, they promised something you relied on, that promise to your detriment, and now they should be held to it." This was interesting, but pursuing legal action against my own parents seemed extreme and would take time I didn't have with tuition coming due. "Is there anything else I should know about the trust structure?" I asked. Thomas reviewed the documents I had brought. "This is interesting. According to these statements, you were listed as a secondary authorized party on the investment account, not just a beneficiary. This was likely done to give you visibility into the account without full control." "And what does that mean practically?" "It means that unless they specifically removed you as an authorized party during the transfer process, you might still have certain transaction privileges, not withdrawal rights to the new combined trust, but possibly some residual access to the investment platform itself." This information sent my mind racing. I thanked Thomas for his insights and paid his consultation fee, then returned home to explore this potential opening further. After several hours of research and some careful testing of the online investment portal, I confirmed what Thomas had suggested might be possible. While I no longer had access to the combined trust assets under Anthony's name, my authorized user status on the investment platform had never been properly revoked. This oversight meant I could still view and potentially execute certain types of transactions on the specific shares that had once been in my trust, particularly the shares of my father's company, which had apparently been transferred in kind, rather than liquidated. The 5,000 shares of North Star Financial Group were sitting in an investment account under my brother's name, but with my father's company email still listed as the contact. Any transaction notifications would go to him, not to Anthony, creating a potential window of opportunity. A plan began to form in my mind. It was audacious and would require perfect timing, but it addressed the fundamental injustice while staying within legal boundaries. I would use my lingering system access to sell the shares that had originally been in my trust fund gradually and in small enough batches to avoid triggering immediate alerts. I would need to move quickly before anyone discovered my access still existed. I would need to create a new brokerage account under my name alone to receive the transferred shares or proceeds. And most importantly, I would need to maintain absolute secrecy until the plan was fully executed. For 3 more days, I researched securities laws and transaction reporting requirements to ensure I wouldn't be doing anything explicitly illegal. Since I was still an authorized user on the platform and the shares had originally been designated for my benefit, I believed I was in a defensible position, especially given my parents' deception. By Friday of that week, I had opened a new brokerage account with a different financial institution, researched the optimal timing for selling shares to minimize detection, and prepared everything needed to execute my plan. The weekend would give me time to start the process with markets closed and my father less likely to be checking work emails. As I finalized my preparations, I felt a strange calm replace the hurt and anger that had consumed me since the lawyer's office. This wasn't just about the money, though, that was rightfully mine. It was about standing up for myself after a lifetime of being second best. It was about consequences for betrayal and deception. The stage was set. On Sunday evening, I would begin reclaiming what had been promised to me. Sunday evening arrived, and I sat at my desk with 2 laptops open before me. On one screen was the investment platform showing the North Star Financial Group shares that had once been part of my trust fund. On the other was my new, independently established brokerage account, ready to receive the proceeds of my planned sales. My heart raced as I prepared to execute the first transaction. I had decided to sell the shares in 10 separate batches over 2 weeks to avoid triggering any automated security alerts that might flag large, unusual movements. My research had shown that transactions under $50,000 were less likely to require additional verification steps. With a deep breath, I entered the order to sell the first 500 shares at market price when trading opened the next morning. The system accepted the order without any security challenges. A small victory, but only the beginning. I closed my laptops and tried to sleep, but my mind kept racing through all the possible ways my plan could go wrong. What if my access was discovered and revoked? What if my father noticed the transactions, despite my careful planning? What if Anthony checked his trust balance and saw the declining value? Monday morning arrived after a restless night. I checked the investment platform first thing and saw the order had executed successfully at market open. 500 shares sold with the proceeds pending transfer to my new account. The system showed no alerts or flags. So far, so good. Over the next 3 days, I executed 3 more sell orders, each for 500 shares. By Thursday evening, I had liquidated 2,000 of the 5,000 shares without detection. The proceeds, totaling just over $120,000, had successfully transferred to my new account. That evening, my mother called inviting me to dinner on Saturday at their house. "Your father and I have barely seen you since you started your new job," she said. "And Anthony will be there too. He just closed a huge deal at work and is bringing his new girlfriend. We want the whole family together." The timing was incredibly tense. I was in the middle of executing my plan, and now I would have to sit across the dinner table from the very people I was secretly working against. But declining would raise suspicions, especially since I normally agreed to family dinners without hesitation. "Sounds great, Mom," I said, keeping my voice casual. "I will be there." "What time?" 6:30. "And Kendall, wear something nice. Anthony's girlfriend comes from the Wilson family." Yes, those Wilsons with the banking fortune. Of course, I thought. Another opportunity for them to showcase their golden child while reminding me of my comparative shortcomings. Friday morning, I sold another 1,000 shares before putting my plan on pause for the weekend. I didn't want any transactions processing while I was physically with my family, as the risk of discovery would be too high. Saturday evening arrived, and I drove to my parents' house in Highland Park, feeling like a spy behind enemy lines. I had just executed a plan to sell 3,000 shares of my father's company stock from my brother's trust, and now I would be making small talk over roast beef and potatoes. I arrived exactly on time to find everyone already gathered in the living room. My father was pouring drinks, while my mother fussed over Anthony and his new girlfriend Eliza Wilson, a willowy blonde, with the polished look of old money. "Kendall," my father called out with the forced enthusiasm he reserved for public settings. "Come in, son." "Scotch." "Just water for now, thanks," I replied, shaking his hand firmly. "I have some work to catch up on tonight after dinner." Anthony slapped me on the back. "Always the responsible one. You should learn to cut loose a little brother." I smiled tightly. Some of us don't have trust funds to fall back on if things go south. The comment was dangerously close to revealing what I knew, but I couldn't resist the subtle jab. My father shot me a quick, sharp look, but Anthony just laughed. "The engineering job, not paying enough for a social life. Maybe you should have studied finance after all." Dinner was an exercise in restraint. I sat through 2 hours of my parents fawning over Anthony's recent work achievements and Eliza's family connections. When the conversation briefly turned to me, it was perfunctory at best. "How's the new job going, Kendall?" my mother asked, as she served dessert. "It's going well. I am leading a project that could significantly improve our product efficiency." "That's nice, dear," she said, already turning back to Eliza. "Now tell me more about your family's summer home in Martha's Vineyard." Near the end of dinner, my father casually mentioned something that made me freeze internally. "By the way, Kendall, I got a notification from Michigan about your final tuition payment coming due." "Don't worry about it. I will handle it from the usual account next week." The usual account meaning the trust fund that no longer existed. I nodded noncommittally, wondering if he was testing me to see if I knew about the transfer. "Thanks, Dad. I appreciate that." His expression gave nothing away as he nodded and returned to his conversation with Anthony about investment opportunities. I left as soon as was politely possible, citing my earlier excuse about work waiting for me. As I drove home, I felt a strange mix of guilt, satisfaction, and anxiety. The dinner had confirmed that my parents had no intention of telling me about what they had done with my trust fund. They were going to continue the charade indefinitely, perhaps paying my tuition from their personal funds, while letting me believe it came from my trust. On Monday morning, I resumed my plan, selling another 1,000 shares. By Wednesday, I had liquidated all 5,000 shares that had originally been in my trust. The total proceeds, just over $300,000, were now safely in my new brokerage account, completely disconnected from my family. I knew it was only a matter of time before the transactions were discovered. The monthly statement would eventually show the missing shares, or my father might check the account balance for some other reason. But I had succeeded in reclaiming at least part of what had been promised to me, and now I waited for the other shoe to drop. I didn't have to wait long. The following Tuesday, just 1 week after I had completed selling all the shares, I received an urgent email from the University of Michigan Financial Services Department. The message stated that the expected payment for my final semester tuition had not been received, and if the balance remained unpaid by Friday, I would be at risk of having my registration canceled. This was the first tangible consequence of my actions. My father's promise to handle it from the usual account had predictably failed since the funds were no longer there to transfer. I could have immediately paid the tuition from my new account containing the share proceeds. Instead, I decided to wait 24 hours to see if my father would contact me about the issue. This would confirm whether he had discovered the missing shares yet. My phone remained silent that day, suggesting he hadn't yet noticed. The next morning, I logged into my personal bank account and paid the tuition balance in full from my own savings, not from the share proceeds. I wanted to keep those funds untouched until the situation with my family resolved and I could afford the tuition payment from my salary savings. Thursday afternoon, my phone buzzed with a text message from my father. "Kendall, call me immediately. The tuition money is gone. Something happened to the account." I read the message several times, noting the panic evident in the all caps. He knew the shares were missing, but apparently didn't yet know what had happened to them or who was responsible. I decided not to respond right away, letting his anxiety build. 3 hours later, after ignoring 2 more increasingly frantic texts and a voicemail, I finally replied, with a deliberately casual message. "Oh, really chill, not mine." The response was calculated to confirm that I knew about the trust fund transfer while maintaining plausible deniability about the missing shares. After all, as far as my father knew, I shouldn't have had access to sell those shares. Within minutes, my phone rang. I let it go to voicemail. Then it rang again. And again. I turned my phone to silent and continued working on my engineering project, a strange calm settling over me. That evening, I checked my phone to find 17 missed calls and a flurry of text messages from both my parents and even one from Anthony. My father's most recent message was the most revealing. "We know it was you. The system shows your login. This is theft, and there will be serious consequences if you don't call me back right now." So, they had discovered my digital footprints. That was expected eventually. I texted back, "Paid my own tuition today. No need to worry about it anymore." Within 30 minutes, there was an aggressive knocking at my apartment door. I looked through the peephole to see both my parents standing in the hallway. My father red-faced with anger, and my mother looking distressed. I opened the door and stepped aside. "Come in. I was wondering when you'd show up." My father stormed past me. "What the hell do you think you're doing? You sold company shares that weren't yours. Do you have any idea how much trouble you're in?" I closed the door calmly and faced them. "I sold shares from what was originally my trust fund. The same trust fund you and Mom assured me for 20 years would pay for my education and help me start my adult life." My mother stepped forward. "Kendall, there's been a misunderstanding." "No misunderstanding, Mom. Preston Harrington told me everything. You transferred my entire trust fund to Anthony 3 years ago, without telling me. You gave my brother both his share and mine, while continuing to promise me the money was there for my education." My father faltered momentarily before regaining his bluster. "We are your parents. We had every legal right to manage that trust as we saw fit until you turned 30. Legal right, perhaps. Moral right, I don't think so. You lied to me for 3 years, Dad." "We did what was best for the family," my mother interjected. "For the family? Or for Anthony?" I asked pointedly. "How exactly was giving him my educational funding? Doing what's best for me?" My father paced the small living room of my apartment. Anthony needed capital for investment opportunities that wouldn't wait. His career trajectory put him in a position to maximize those funds in ways your engineering career never could. The casual dismissal of my chosen profession was so typical that I almost laughed. "So, you decided my future was worth sacrificing for his, and you didn't even have the decency to tell me." "We were going to pay your tuition ourselves," my mother said defensively. "You wouldn't have noticed any difference. Except for the $500,000 that would have helped me buy a home, start a family, or invest in my own future," I countered. "The money you promised me my entire life." My father stopped pacing and pointed an accusatory finger at me. "What you did was illegal. You accessed an account that wasn't yours and sold shares you had no right to sell. I could call the police right now." I maintained my composure, grateful for the research I had done. Actually, I was never removed as an authorized user on the investment platform after the trust transfer. Legally, I still had system permissions to execute those trades. But by all means, call the police. I am sure they would be very interested to hear about how you secretly diverted my trust fund to my brother while continuing to represent to me and the university that the money was still there for my education. My confident response clearly caught him off guard. He looked to my mother, who seemed equally unsure how to proceed. "Where is the money from the shares?" my father finally demanded. "In a secure account," I replied, "and it will stay there." "That's our money," he shouted. "No, it's mine. The money that was promised to me since I was 8 years old. The money that was going to be my start in life. Just like you always said. I simply took back what was already mine. My mother began to cry, a tactic she had often used to diffuse conflicts. Kendall, how could you do this to the family? We raised you better than this. I remained unmoved. You raised me to believe that hard work and honesty were important values. Then you secretly took my trust fund and gave it to Anthony because he chose the career path you preferred. Which lesson am I supposed to learn from that? My father pulled out his phone. I am calling our lawyer right now. This isn't over, Kendall. Call whoever you want, I said calmly. But before you do, you might want to consider what would happen if the board of directors at North Star found out that the CFO misled his own son about a trust fund for 3 years. What would that do to your reputation for financial integrity? How would your clients feel about trusting you with their money? His hand froze over the phone. I had struck a nerve. My father had built his career on his reputation for honesty and sound judgment. This situation could potentially damage that carefully cultivated image. Are you threatening me? He asked, his voice dangerously quiet. Suggesting we all take some time to cool down and think about next steps, I replied. I paid my tuition. The shares I sold represented less than half of what my trust fund was worth at the time you transferred it to Anthony. Perhaps we can find a resolution that acknowledges the wrong that was done while finding a path forward. My parents exchanged a look, clearly realizing that their position wasn't as strong as they had initially thought. After a few more tense exchanges, they left with my father delivering a final warning that this matter wasn't settled. As I closed the door behind them, I felt an unexpected sense of empowerment. For the first time in my life, I had stood up to my parents and advocated for myself. Whatever came next, I knew I would never again silently accept being the afterthought in my own family. The weeks following the confrontation with my parents were tense and complicated. As expected, my father consulted with Preston Harrington and several other attorneys about potential legal action against me. However, the unusual circumstances of the case, combined with the potentially embarrassing public exposure, made them hesitant to pursue formal charges. 3 days after our confrontation, I received a call from Anthony. Unlike our parents, he was direct and to the point. What the hell, Kendall? You stole from my trust fund. No, Anthony. I reclaimed part of what was originally mine, which Mom and Dad secretly gave to you without telling me. There was a pause on the line. What are you talking about? You didn't know, I asked, genuinely surprised. Mom and Dad transferred my entire trust fund to you 3 years ago. They never told me, and apparently they never told you either. Another long pause. They said something about consolidating some family investments, but they never said they were giving me your trust fund. Are you serious? Completely serious. They transferred everything that was supposed to be for my education and future to you. Over $475,000 at the time of transfer. They kept promising me the money was there for my tuition, even though they had already given it all to you. Holy shit, Anthony muttered. I had no idea, Kendall. I mean, I knew my trust had grown significantly, but I assumed that was just good market performance or additional contributions from Mom and Dad. His apparent shock seemed genuine, which slightly shifted my perspective on the situation. Perhaps Anthony hadn't been complicit in the deception after all. Well, now you know, I said. So when Dad tells you I stole from you, understand that I was taking back a small portion of what was supposed to be mine in the first place. The conversation with Anthony marked the beginning of a complicated family division. Over the next several weeks, the extended family inevitably became involved. My father's parents took his side immediately, insisting that parents had the right to make financial decisions for their children, regardless of prior promises. My mother's sister, Aunt Sophia, surprisingly became my strongest advocate. Diana, what you and Richard did was wrong, regardless of your legal right to do it. I overheard her saying during a heated phone call with my mother. You raised that boy to believe he had security for his education, then pulled the rug out without even telling him. How could you expect him not to react when he found out? Thanksgiving arrived with no resolution in sight. I declined my parents' invitation to dinner, choosing instead to spend the holiday with friends from work. Christmas was equally strained, with the family effectively split into two camps. I attended a brief gift exchange at my parents' house, but left before dinner when my father made a pointed comment about family loyalty and respect. In January, as I began my final semester at Michigan, Preston Harrington contacted me with a proposed settlement from my parents. They would officially recognize my right to the proceeds from the shares I had sold in exchange for a signed agreement that I would make no further claims against Anthony's trust and would never publicly discuss what had happened. I consulted with my own attorney, who advised that the offer was reasonable given the circumstances. You've already secured a significant portion of what was originally yours, she said. This agreement would put the matter to rest legally, while allowing you to move forward without the threat of future litigation. I agreed to the settlement not because I felt it fully addressed the wrong that had been done, but because I wanted to close this chapter and focus on my future. The agreement was signed in Preston's office with my parents present, but barely speaking to me. Anthony chose not to attend. With the legal matters settled, I threw myself into completing my degree and advancing my career. I graduated with high honors that spring, with none of my family in attendance at my request. It was a bittersweet achievement, marking both academic success and the painful fracturing of family bonds. In the months that followed, I built a life independent of my parents' financial influence or approval. I was promoted twice at the tech company, earning recognition for my innovative problem-solving approaches. I invested the share proceeds conservatively, creating my own financial security rather than relying on the promises of others. My relationship with Anthony evolved in unexpected ways. Once the initial shock and anger subsided, we began to cautiously rebuild our connection separate from our parents' influence. Over coffee one Saturday, he made a surprising admission. I never wanted to be in finance, you know, he said, staring into his cup. I wanted to study architecture, but Dad made it clear that wasn't an acceptable choice. I had no idea. I replied, seeing my brother in a new light. I envied your courage to study what you actually wanted, he continued. I just wasn't strong enough to stand up to them. These revelations helped me understand the complex dynamics that had shaped our family for decades. My parents had controlled both of us in different ways, favoring Anthony, while simultaneously pressuring him into their chosen path. As the one-year anniversary of my discovery at the lawyer's office approached, my mother reached out with a tentative invitation to dinner, just the two of us. Over a quiet meal at a neutral restaurant, she made her first acknowledgement of wrongdoing. We thought we were doing what was best, she said softly. Your father was convinced that consolidating the funds under Anthony would create better investment opportunities. But we should have told you. Keeping it secret was wrong, and I am sorry for my part in that. It wasn't a complete apology, but it was a start. I accepted it with the understanding that rebuilding trust would be a long, gradual process if it happened at all. My father took much longer to make any concession. It wasn't until he faced a health scare later that year that he finally reached out with his own version of an olive branch, inviting me to his office to discuss family matters. While he never explicitly apologized, he did acknowledge that certain decisions could have been handled with more transparency. Through it all, I maintained my boundaries and independence, refusing to fall back into old patterns of seeking their approval. The experience had taught me that financial autonomy was an essential component of personal freedom, especially within complex family dynamics. 2 years passed since that fateful meeting in Preston Harrington's office. In that time, I had built a life that exceeded my own expectations, one founded on self-reliance, rather than family support or approval. The engineering project I had been leading revolutionized our company's main product, earning me a substantial bonus and stock options that far exceeded what I had reclaimed from my original trust fund. More importantly, I had developed a strong sense of self-worth, independent of my parents' validation. The betrayal that had initially felt devastating ultimately became the catalyst for personal growth I might never have achieved otherwise. My relationship with my family transformed into something entirely different from what it had been. With my parents, we established a cordial but measured connection. We spoke monthly and gathered for major holidays, but with clear boundaries that protected my independence and emotional well-being. My father never fully acknowledged the wrong he had done, but he did eventually develop a grudging respect for the success I achieved on my own terms. During a family dinner, marking my promotion to senior engineering manager, he actually raised a toast to Kendall, who proved he could make his own way. "Well done, son." Coming from him, this simple acknowledgement meant more than any elaborate apology could have. It represented his recognition that I had succeeded, despite not because of his influence. My mother worked more actively to rebuild our relationship, making genuine efforts to understand my life and interests. She attended a tech conference where I was presenting, sitting in the front row, and asking thoughtful questions afterward. These small gestures gradually mended some of the broken trust between us. Most surprisingly, my relationship with Anthony evolved into something stronger and more authentic than it had ever been. 6 months after our coffee conversation, he made a life-changing decision of his own, leaving his finance career to pursue a master's degree in architectural design. He used part of his trust fund to fund this transition, finally pursuing his true passion. "You inspired me, you know," he told me during a weekend hiking trip we took together. "Watching you stand up for yourself, seeing you succeed on your own terms, it made me question why I was living someone else's dream instead of my own." We became allies in navigating our complicated family dynamics, supporting each other in establishing healthy boundaries with our parents. This brotherhood, built on mutual respect rather than competition, became one of the most valuable outcomes of the entire painful experience. The financial lessons were equally profound. I approached money with a new perspective, seeing it as a tool for independence rather than a measure of worth or success. I lived below my means, invested wisely, and built an emergency fund that ensured I would never be vulnerable to financial manipulation again. Through therapy and self-reflection, I worked through the emotional impact of the betrayal. My therapist, Dr. Laura Simmons, helped me recognize how the experience had triggered lifelong feelings of being second best and undervalued. The money was symbolic, she pointed out during one session. It wasn't just about the funds themselves, but what they represented: your parents' commitment to your future, their belief in your worth. The betrayal was in what the action said, about how they valued you compared to your brother. This insight helped me process my anger and gradually release it, not for their benefit, but for my own peace of mind. I learned that forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting or excusing, but rather freeing yourself from the burden of resentment. In my personal life, I met Sophia during a volunteer event for a STEM education program in underserved communities. Her background in psychology and natural insight helped me navigate the complex emotions still occasionally triggered by family interactions. She became not just my partner, but a source of perspective when old patterns threatened to re-emerge. "Your worth isn't determined by your parents' assessment," she reminded me during a particularly difficult family gathering. "You've built a life that reflects your values and priorities. That's the true measure of success." Through all of these experiences, I developed a deep understanding of what truly matters in life. The betrayal that once seemed devastating ultimately led me to greater self-awareness, stronger boundaries, and more authentic relationships. The trust fund that was taken from me was replaced by something far more valuable: trust in myself and my ability to create my own security and success. I learned that true wealth isn't measured in dollars but in personal autonomy and genuine connections. If you are facing betrayal by those who should support you most, know that it doesn't define your worth or limit your potential. Sometimes the greatest gift comes disguised as loss, pushing you to find strength you never knew you possessed. True family is built on mutual respect and support, not control or favoritism. And sometimes we need to create that family through chosen relationships rather than relying solely on biological connections. Have you ever faced betrayal from someone you trusted completely? How did you respond? And what did you learn from the experience? Drop a comment below. And if this story resonated with you, please like and subscribe for more reflections on the town, family dynamics, personal growth, and finding your own path. Share this with someone who might need to hear that they too can overcome family betrayal and build a life on their own terms. Thank you for listening to my story. And remember that sometimes the most painful chapters lead to the most meaningful growth.